Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm very excited today. We got returning to the show, John Tenney. As you know, author, musician, lecturer, explorer, just, maybe I mean this as a compliment, but I would even say like an esoteric madman. Uh,
I don't have a
li-
problem with that.
living within and amongst all of the anomalistic and paranormal and the occult and the esoteric strangeness that so many people try to maybe avoid in their lives. John has been immersed and I would say even become one with it when it comes to, wanting to get some great insight on all of this kind of stuff. I don't know if there's a better source out there than than talking to you. So thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. I don't know how much I can give you, but being
Well,
immersed in it for a long time, and I think even believing I'm a part of it is, I mean, if I have any belief, I'd always say I don't have any beliefs. But if I have any one belief, it's that something isn't insane is happening and I'm a part of it.
well, I think that's a fair assessment. And, it's one thing to be humble. It's another thing to, just acknowledge the basic facts. And, we live in a world where facts might be a little fuzzy, but I think that's one we can all stand firm on right there, what you just said. I originally reached out to you because I think it was last week. I was just kind of sitting here thinking like, oh, because every once in a while I'll revisit, Hanson's work, and I'm just fascinated with duality and the liminality of life, and because I think it's so pervasive, especially in like the last 5-6 years in our country. It's really manifested itself in politics and also cultural change in many different ways. And I'm thinking like, well, the idea of the trickster and really thriving in that space and coming to light, and not trying to designate it good nor bad. It's like, okay, so framing this and trying to understand what life has been doing and has been happening in life, and then you mix in the pandemic and all this stuff that's worldwide. I was like, wow, like the trickster seems to really have manifested itself in major ways, like on the big stage, and the biggest of all stages, really. And you could say Trump, you could say, a lot of people think, Fauci is, the trickster. He's saying one thing one day, he's saying another thing another day, and not that they're like specifically trying to like, okay, we need to be the trickster now. And then, and then whether you get into the occult connections between like, the Great White Brotherhood and the Black Lodge and all of this other, it's such a rabbit hole to go down. And like, are there these great forces fighting each other in the world that we live in that we're unaware of? And how does that idea manifest itself in so many different ways? And I think you could even see that there's all this great good versus evil. And I think Trump was, he tapped into that idea, and like the conspiratorial conservatives tapped into this idea with the cabal and the cannibalistic liberal group and the New World Order. It's like it's all over the place. And so when I start thinking about the last 5 years, instead of thinking of like this country's just been such a fucking shit show, I actually had this moment of like, oh, this is the trickster has just been given so much oxygen into the room somehow. And it's kind of just really taken that oxygen and ran with it. Right. And I was like, who better to talk to about this? And not that we're going to figure out like what it all means or why. I think that's a problem, right? Like when we try to figure out
Yeah,
why is that
putting
doing
something
it?
in an enclosed space that's unenclosable.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and this is not to say that I don't think this has been happening throughout history. I mean, I think you could look at the Cultural Revolution of like, the 60s, and then, the expansion of the DEA, to try to, put an end to the hippie movement and all this other, there's all these different things that have happened throughout history, specifically in this country. But are you finding, or do you think, what's your opinion on that? Do you think that the Trickster has been just really exploding in strength and manifesting itself in so many different forms lately?
Yeah, I don't think that it's exploded and appeared from nowhere. I mean, I don't think it exists within a vacuum. I think the thing that has always interested me the most about the trickster-esque nature of what seems to be our shared reality is that mythologically, archetypically, the idea of the trickster spirit is that it doesn't have a form, right? They're all shape changers. And, it can be a coyote, it can be a rabbit, it can be a man, it can be a woman. It's genderless. It's completely, it'll take on any form that it wants to take on. And I think that where we are right now as a society, we've built a society around people being able to be fluid in who they are. Some people have different profiles on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, in real life. Like the masks that we normally would only see the guy at the bar, and then we'd see him at home. He has two masks. Like we'd only see those two personalities. Now we've been given the ability to see the myriad of masks that everyone wears all the times, and everyone is the trickster. Everyone is constantly shape changing and evolving. And I think the thing that worries us isn't so much the shape changing and the trickster-esque part of it, but when someone finds a mask and refuses to take it down. So like, if you talk about someone like Trump found a mask and then refuses to be anything other than that mask. Meanwhile, we're all out here like, I'm constantly changing. I'm constantly a new person. I'm transforming. I'm doing that which the universe has only ever showed me, which is change. And you stand in the middle of it saying, this is exactly who I am. You get no more, no less. This is me. And we know that there's something, our bullshit detecting of the universe that it gives us says like, oh, that's nonsense. No one is eternally just one thing.
Yeah. The first thing that pops into my mind is Andrew Dice Clay, who did this Dice Man character in his act as a stand-up comedian. And it was so popular that the Dice Man mask, it became permanently affixed to his face. Right. And now everyone knows him just as Andrew Dice Clay. Yeah. And, that's obviously a much less, let's say, I hate to describe these words, but destructive kind of mask to refuse to take off. But
I think it's interesting too, because you talk about someone like Dice, like if you want to talk about people who wear masks, you know this very well. It's comedians. And that brings us back to tricksters, right? Like, so comedians have a persona that they go on stage. I'm going to be very open about who I am, but it's a cultivated openness. Most comedians have some kind of hole they're trying to fill and gain it through the acceptance of the audience and laughter. And so they go and portray themselves a certain way. And then, you meet them in real life. There's a different mask there. There's a life. I mean, but we love watching comedians because we know that that's a mask. We know that they're covering something up, or they're trying to show us that we ourselves are wearing masks.
Yeah, and there's also this knowledge of knowing the mask is there, and then also being surprised when the mask is down. So many times, I know, like when I'm off stage or just living my life in general, I'm not always being hilarious or, trying to be funny. And people are just like, wow, you're a comedian? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not on stage right now. Can we have a serious discussion about things? And not everything's a joke all the time, but so that is interesting that we know that the mask is there. And yet sometimes we're like taken aback when the mask is removed. Like I was very hopeful, and some might say I was naive, and maybe they're correct, but I was like, I remember in 2016 after the election, I was like, well, you know what? maybe he did what he had to do to get in the door, and maybe he'll surprise us. And once he realizes the weight of the position, and maybe try to do some good stuff, right? I was
Right.
like, let's see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And instead of trying to fix this permanent future reality that we're, collectively manifesting as like, this is going to be the worst 4 years of everyone's life. And then, and then time plays out. And depending on where you stand on that, it had varying effects or varying results. But it is fascinating to think about the different masks that all of us can wear now. I haven't considered that.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
but that's the thing too, right? Like, because in my brain, for some reason, I always think like the closest thing to a comedian that we have are politicians, because they go up on stage in front of people, they say what is going to get them accolades and love, and then they walk off stage and they're not that person, but everybody collectively in their mind has that public mask that they wear. And then when they walk off stage and start doing things behind the scenes, you're like, but I thought that, with a comedian, you're like, I thought you were funny. And then when a politician walks off stage, you're like, I thought you were sincere.
Yeah.
And you realize that it's masks.
Do you think that we have an understanding? Do you think it stems from just a lack of understanding about ourselves in general when it comes to like us as humans, understanding this mask concept and understanding how we behave differently in different situations, and whether it's, survival or whatever it is, right? That lends us, or that makes us behave in these and use these different masks for different situations because they're more effective in maybe getting an outcome that is desirable in those situations. Do you think that enough of us have that understanding of the masks that we're even putting on?
I think that we recognize it in our own ways and in our own words and in our own intellect. But right along with masks, I was having some conversations with a friend of mine who recently did a podcast, and they were kind of talking similarly about trickster and jokester spirits. And I was talking about, like, internally, my dialogue that I have with myself in my head is that reality is a game. It doesn't have rules. It's play. And that's like the universe asks you to play the way that you were told to play when you were a little kid. There were no rules. Your parents just told you to go outside and play. No rules, no winners, no losers. I think when you apply winners and losers, that's when the game like starts to fall apart. It starts to become no fun. Then you do have winners and losers. Then people feel bad when they should just be playing. But at the same time, I was discussing with this friend of mine, when we talk about the kind of nature of our, what seems to be our shared reality, jokes are, for me, in my internal dialogue, the best kind of analogy to this existence. Because when we talk about things like liminal spaces, things happen a lot around rivers, and they happen around a lot around doors and stairwells and bridges and all these weird liminal spaces. The ultimate liminal space is a joke, right? Because I take you to a place with the setup, and then there is a moment where anything is possible before the punchline is revealed. Anything can happen. And so you're putting people into this state of liminality through the joke. And I feel like reality is the ultimate joke, because we have this entire setup of our lifetime without knowing what the punchline is. And so we're constantly in this state of liminality, waiting to find out what the punchline is. And anything is possible because we don't know what the punchline is. So we're just constantly on edge, waiting to hear what the joke is. And so, whether it's our internal dialogues of like, I don't really know who I am, or the internal dialogue of like, I don't really know what I am or what's to come, I think that's why we're so engaged with the trickster spirit. And I think that's why it shows itself so much right now. And especially in this time, it's so frustrating because it's apparent that no one has any idea what's going on. The rules change from day to day. The narratives change from day to day. The players change from day to day faster than it's ever happened before than we can even process. And we're like, oh, fuck. No one has any idea what's going on. And that is a place where the archetype of the trickster can thrive.
It's really fascinating to think about it that way, because when you're a kid, it's easy. You have, like, if you're lucky, you have a parental figure there telling you everything's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. This happens. And collectively, you get older and you realize, oh, maybe I'm a parent now, or, definitely a grown up. And you say, oh, we're all just making this up as we go along. And for me, the best example of that is having conversations with people. Is I tell people, I'm like, the best part about talking with people is, it's especially people who are authorities, or, if I'm ever trying to be an authority, or most of the time, I'm just making this shit up as it comes into my brain as I'm talking, right? And so just having organic conversation, we're all making it up. We're in that space of like the unknown, what's happening next. Now, granted, some of us are much better at, especially like maybe a politician, that like if you have a teleprompter or something like that, it's a little bit different. But there is something really fascinating about we just embody this. And it maybe the trickster itself is kind of an outward manifestation of just our always state of mind, or the truth of the reality that we're living in itself from our subconscious. I mean, I don't know, but it is fascinating to think about that angle.
Yeah, I mean, I love like these conversations, the one that you and I are having right now. When you said what you said about, I'm just saying words, I don't know where they're coming from. They're just popping out of my brain. Like I'm doing it right now too. As a matter of fact, I'm probably speaking fast enough to where my brain doesn't know what's going to come out anyway. And when you do watch a politician, it's rehearsed and they have stump speeches. And so that's like a comedian's set, right? Like they got a solid 5 that they can do. And they know where to hit the beats and where to hit the points. But then when you get them in a like Q&A session, you see them start to stumble because they're just making it up. They're just looking for words to grab, where if they just spoke openly and honestly off the top of their head, you would see like, oh, that's what they genuinely think about. That's how their brain genuinely works, without the filter of thinking about what I'm going to say next. And like you said, hopefully when you're growing up, you have a parent. Little kids, obviously, the trope is little kids, why to their parents. And, the trope is it's so annoying. And eventually you just start, making up answers. Well, you're making up answers, the answers that were made up and given to you, whether it be through your college classes or the scientists or the newspapers you read. Everybody's just made up the answers. I feel bad when little kids grow up and stop saying why, or you find an adult that doesn't say why anymore. That again goes back to my idea of like the only thing the universe has ever showed me personally, so it seems, is that the universe is in a constant state of flux. It's in a constant state of change. It's continually growing and destroying and rebuilding, and I don't understand how we as a part of that, as an individual inside of an ever-changing process, get to a point where we're like, I'm going to be the thing that doesn't change.
I am going to be static.
Yeah.
I remain stone amongst the sea. I mean, it seems that,
and every old philosophy tells you that's terrible, right? Like whether it's like you read something from the Tao or Buddhism or something from like a Native American culture, like everything has always been like, don't be stone, be water, bend like the trees, bend like the grass. Like every philosophy that all of the people who have thought about this for as long as there have been people have been like, listen, just fucking change.
Yeah. Be open to it at the very least.
At the least.
And, in politics, if you are open to change, now you're a flip-flopper, which was one of the big, I think it was the Bush-Gore election, where Gore was getting hammered as being a flip-flopper. Right. And I remember just sitting there watching this being like, wait, he learned new information and changed his mind? That's a bad thing? And in the static world of, political paradigms, apparently it is. But I guess I understand, I guess, to a certain degree. I guess I have some sympathetic view when it comes to trying to communicate to really large numbers of people. I suppose there is at least, and this is probably even a taught thought program that I'm getting ready to spit out right now. There is probably some benefit to staying on message, right? To have a clear message when you're trying to broadcast really, really wide.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
it'd be fascinating to have a politician go up there and be like, listen, I don't know what's going to happen to gas prices. I don't know if unemployment's going to go up or down, but we are going to do our best to try to make sure everybody kind of can live their best life. And I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but I believe that we should all be, if someone, because I think it's the, they're not allowed to spend the currency of not knowing the answers. We always have to act like, and this manifests itself in all of our lives. We have to act like we know what's going to happen, even though all of us know that there's no way to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty personally I have is the way that I have done lectures for 30 years. Like I pace back and forth before I lecture, during my lectures. I take a lot of time sometimes between thoughts thinking about what I'm going to talk about next, not what I'm going to say, but what I'm going to talk about in general. But I tell people at the beginning of my lectures, like, I don't really know what I'm going to say. You're just here with me, and so hold on, and I'm going to pace back and forth because that's how my mind works, and I'm just going to say a bunch of stuff, and if you like it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. I would be super interested to see a politician go up in front of a crowd and say, like, listen, I know you've heard talking points before, but I'm just going to say the stuff that comes into my mind. I'm going to tell you some stuff. If you like it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. Maybe we'll figure something else out together. Maybe we'll construct a larger, like, if you have questions, come to me after and we'll talk about them. To see someone be that open and honest in politics, I'd be really interested to see what happens to that person who would say, like, what you were talking about, like, listen, I don't know. I'm going to get up in front of a bunch of people and say, I don't know. But I don't know, and I've argued this before, is one of the smartest things that you can say, right? Like, I don't have it figured out. Help me figure it out. I think I even told you on when you DM'd me, I was like, I look forward to constructing a new ideas with you. Like, that's where I want people to be, right? Not that I have an idea that I'm going to force on you, but that together you and I are going to grow a new idea and construct a new idea that we couldn't have done by ourselves. And I think it would be so interesting to see a politician say, like, listen, I've got some ideas about this, but I need your help to tell, we're going to talk to each other.
Yeah, which would be tapping into the idea of, for the people, by the people, representative of the people that they are leading in some way. I think sometimes we often forget that when it comes to politicians, state senators, whoever they're called representatives, for God's sake, meaning that they're supposed to be representing the will of the people that they're governing. But when it comes to American culture, I think you and I, as being a part of American culture, probably feel most comfortable kind of getting into that side of things just because we've been a part of it. Although one might say that being a part of that system has blinded us, too close to the trees. So, but it's interesting. I wonder what your thoughts are on through these major cultural upheavals, because I feel like we're having, in many ways, it's beautiful, right? We've had political upheaval, which I really hope leads to kind of a shattering of the old system, so something new can grow. We have a cultural upheaval with so many different things, and whether it's marginalized groups really pushing through the door that hasn't been opened for them. We have individual upheaval when it comes to, I don't have to just accept the roles that have been predefined for me in my life when it comes to how do I view myself, how do I feel I am as a person, whether it's gender, sexuality, all these things. And to me, that's beautiful. And that's not to say that this hasn't happened in the past, but it feels like, and probably because I'm suffering from that, well, I'm alive right now, so it's all happening right now, kind of like prophecy stuff that has happened from the beginning, ever since the beginning of the Bible. People were like, 5 years after the Bible, people were like, Jesus is coming back tomorrow. You know, all the signs are here, and every generation has thought that, right? So I wonder if there is a certain kind of special mix happening and a transition happening that encompasses all these other larger pieces, making for a larger transition. And I know that the age of Aquarius, many people will say, you know, we've transitioned into a whole new age, or we're in the process of that. It's not like a light switch goes off. Some people call it an awakening. Do you feel like it's more intense now than it maybe has been in quite a while, or just because we're alive during it?
I think being alive during it has a lot to do with it. But I also think, like, for as much as I say that, like, growth and change and becoming different and constructing ideas with people is one of my kind of primary goals, I also don't want to get cemented into that position, because that puts me at the same end of people who have a belief that's cemented where they don't want to move from either, right? And so I think the thing that we're seeing now, the reason it seems so transitional, is because, I'm going to bring this kind of back to tricksters again, is that I think there's more squirrels than there ever were, right? So like in mythology, like the squirrel ran between the roots of the tree and the branches of the tree, delivering messages and saying, like, you know what it's like down there? And then they'd go up there and say, like, what's going on up here? And then they'd go back down and they go, you know what, it's down there. And so you'd have the squirrel archetype, the trickster, running back and forth, whether that's, I mean, and that's again the archetype, you know, Hermes going between the land of the living and the land of the dead. But I think you have more squirrels than you've ever had. I think you have people who are like, oh shit, this is what my family is like. This is what I'm like. This is what those people are like. And we have more squirrels interacting with each other. And we're like, oh, this tree is full of squirrels. Like, it's not so much people at the top and people at the bottom. Like, we're all running back and forth trying to give each other information. And we think that we have the information, so we need to pass it on back and forth between, when if all the squirrels just stopped, like in the middle of the tree, like maybe we could figure something out and talk. But I think, as silly as that sounds, like, I think there's more squirrels than there ever were. I think there's less people at the bottom and less people at the top, and there's more like people, but we're squirrels, right? So how do you manage that? Like, everybody's flying at 1,000,000 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously there is something to just being alive in this period of time. You know, when it got really bad and hairy, when the pandemic began and people were saying, like, this is the end of the world, one of the things that I would try and impress upon them to maybe allow some sort of comfort is, I would say, like, can you imagine someone, you know, in 1939 or 1940, when the entire world was at war? Like, that is when they were like, things are fucked. The earth is going to end. Every country in the world is fighting with every other country in the world. Like, now you don't have massive wars going on. You have this pandemic that's raging across the earth, and people like, it's going to end. Like, this is the worst it's ever been. It's the worst it's ever been for us now. That's not the worst it's ever been for every generation seems to go through. This is the worst it's ever been. And hopefully they also go through a period of change and what seems to be enlightenment, age of Aquarian, you know, the 60s, free love and rock and roll music and the drug culture. But at the same time, like, the Vietnam War was going on and the streets were filled with violence and the civil rights movement was going on. And so at that time too, you could have said, like, this seems like we're on the edge of a massive change. Things are going to be different than they ever were. And yet that ever were, like, sits in the background and says, I'm going to be ever were, and I'm always going to be here. If you read the news headlines, look at Time magazine's covers from the 1990s, and it talks about, you know, the gay and lesbian culture. It talks about rape culture. I mean, it's all of the same exact stories. And then go back 100 years and look at the newspaper headlines, and it's countries at war and border disputes, and, you know, should African Americans be allowed to have rights? And you're like, oh, so this is always that ever were is like always in the background, while the squirrels are like, something's changing, something should change.
Yeah, there is that idea of, being alive in the moment too. It's because what we can experience is obviously going to be, for most of us, more profound than what we can read about, or even what we can speculate about coming next, even though that sometimes can be more powerful than what we're experiencing now. And I think the rise of artificial intelligence and, the singularity, that's like on the horizon of the next big, like, this is the craziest thing that's ever happened. And, whether or not that, happens in our lifetime, we'll see. But, it makes me curious when it comes to these experiences. And I'm not sure where I read it, but whether it was in Hanson's The Trickster and the Paranormal or some other book about when a society is in cultural change, when they're going through upheaval, there seem to be more sightings of UFOs. There seem to be more paranormal reports from people when the greater system that they're living inside of is under some kind of upheaval or major transition or change. Have you looked into that, or what are your thoughts on the idea that when the bigger system that we are a part of is under a major upheaval, that this strangeness seems to at least seemingly manifest itself more often or in a higher frequency?
Yeah, I mean, I did at the very beginning of the pandemic, maybe a few months in, like I got contacted because I had said something on Twitter about I was getting a ton of ghost sightings once the pandemic had started and quarantines were starting. The New York Times did this article about, are people seeing more ghosts? But in the article, I said, like, but you also have to realize that people are now inside their house more than they've ever been. So they're hearing their house. They actually are understanding that their house makes noises. And if you throw ghosts in on top, if you say that there are ghosts, like the ghosts are probably trying to figure out why the fuck you're there so often. Like, why didn't you go to work today? Why are you still here?
I thought this was a timeshare.
Yeah, like I didn't think you were going to be here all the time. I'm here all the time. You're not supposed to be here all the time.
This is not our lease arrangement.
But I feel like that idea of like this, like the cultural shift. And if you think about it on a cosmological scale, right? Like we say, like something massive is happening, but we really don't know if something massive is happening or if something that's just on this one planet with, a few billion people on it are all getting a little anxious about what's going on. Look at it, as the Earth is our home and it's our house and we're all kind of trapped inside of it, right? And when things get a little hairy and the bills like start to pile up and we get roommates that we don't like, we start to get a little panicky. And I think we perhaps start to dream and we start to imagine better worlds, right? And so when we open up our minds to those dreams and those imaginings, do we awaken within us the ability to have experiences with things that aren't normally perceived by this world? So, when people do take time to sit in their house and go out on their back deck and, they don't have to go to work and they're not stressed out over their boss and waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning and the traffic 2 hours to get to work, when they have a moment to like sit on their back deck and look at the sky and get back in touch with the things that created us. We spent far more millennia looking at the stars and looking at the ground and touching the ground than we ever did sitting in chairs talking to each other on Zoom. Maybe we reconnect with those entities or energies that were always there that we've just kind of forgotten about.
That is really interesting. If we, take our head up from our phone, or if we're in a situation where we're forced to relax, to slow it down.
Yeah.
The changes that can happen. Because
it's funny that you say that, because like one of the, again, like the conversations in the UFO community is like, why now that everybody has cell phones with cameras, like why don't we see more UFOs? And it's because literally everybody is walking around with their head down looking at their phone. Like people used to walk around with their hands in their pockets, looking at the sky, and and looking at their neighborhood and looking at trees and clouds. And now you're literally facing, your head is face down into your hand at the ground. So of course you're not going to see more UFOs. You're not looking.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and I don't want to be the old grumpy guy, but I will be. I mean, the fact that the behavior is being so normalized is pretty crazy to me. Like even on TV commercials now, and it's mostly the cell phone companies, right, who are normalizing it because they want you on your phone all the time because that's how they make their money. You see commercials now for like, now there's better service. So while you're at this live event, you can be messaging all your friends the whole time. You can be on your phone instead of being at the live event. The live event has become secondary. It's almost this like social cachet just to prove, hey, I could afford to have been at this thing. Right. And still just do what I do all the time.
Yeah. Right? One of the things that I think is super interesting is that, there was I think it was done in Norway a couple of years ago, or maybe less than a couple of years ago, maybe less than a year ago. But they did a study, the majority of people on the planet who have cell phones, we don't dream about cell phones. They don't show up in our dreams. Like people very uncommonly ever have a dream about talking on a cell phone. And I think it's really interesting that the cell phone, as predominant it is in the real world, has yet to invade the dream world. Like people still have dreams about talking on landlines, but they don't have dreams about the thing that they hold in their hand 12 hours out of the day.
Wow. I mean, does it just take a certain period of time for something to, and I don't want to say become an archetype, but I mean, is that the right way of saying it? Like the cell phone to become that object, or is it because it changes so much since in the last 15, 20 years since it's been out, from a flip phone to a smartphone, and the sizes? Is it because there's so many varying images of it, or you'd think that the essence of it also could just seep in, right? Or does it take longer than that?
I have a completely non-scientific idea that because cell phones are so passive, and because there's no, like, everything you do on your phone, when you touch your phone, like there's no resistance to it. It's just like touching a piece of smooth glass over and over and over again, that your brain doesn't process it as a real thing, right? So like you seem to be doing all of this stuff on your phone, but all your brain is registering is like the tactile sense of touching glass over and over and over again. And so it's like, oh, that thing's not important. It's not really doing anything. I'm just touching this smooth surface. And so your brain's like, that's not important. But yet, eating and loving and caring, like with other people, like it's all tactile and it has a sensation to it. And so your brain is like, give me more of that stuff. And that's what your dreams are about: running and hunting and lovemaking and being chased. Like there's all of this primal, tactile, kinetic energy involved with dreaming. And your phone is you're just touching something smooth. So your brain is like, fuck that.
It's almost like, in some ways it's this interesting kind of like shard of glass that has become a portal to so many different worlds in our own hands, that the jump in technology from a landline to what we have as smartphones now was so profound that maybe it's that level of so big a jump that we're not even aware of how far we jumped. And we just haven't processed it. We just skipped it over and accepted it as a new reality. Let's move on with our lives.
I mean, yeah, but usually, I'm just spitballing obviously now, but in the world of imagination and dreams, usually dreams are the precursor to the thing, right? So like people were dreaming about going into outer space before we ever went into outer space. That just became a reality, but it was in the dream long before we ever did it. And now we have done this thing and it refuses to go into the dream. I find that very odd.
That is odd, and it sounded actually quite ominous when you said this thing refuses to go into the dream. And then the first image that popped in my head was like, no, it is its own thing, and it shall remain its own thing, and it will not be controlled by you, even though you think you're in total control of it.
Right. And who is really in control of it, right? Like we're all using apps developed by companies and corporations. So it's not really your thing.
Yeah, and as someone who created an app recently, I just want you to know that we do think that it's your thing. Just everybody out there wants to know. Crystallize, you can download it now on Android or iPhone. Anyway, so the idea of being able to be still and be more aware of your surroundings, coupled with the fact that we're always looking down at these new devices and we're not paying attention, even though we have the opportunity to, and some people really did do it though. Does that mean that there is not an increase in this strange behavior when there's upheaval or major transition happening? Or which side of that do you fall on, that we just notice it more, or there actually might be an uptick in the behavior of the strange phenomena in this world when it's kind of, when everything kind of gets put into the tumble cycle?
I don't know. That's really interesting. And maybe, for as much as people say that we have lost focus because we're dividing our attention between so many different things, perhaps it is that cell phones and the technology we have now have made us actually like regained focus. And so when we are torn away by a weird experience or a weird sound or a weird sighting, like we become hyper vigilated on it, and we immediately focus and try and process the information with as limited information as we have, knowing that we have all of this other information that can come to us at any moment. And so, something that we would have taken as a kind of natural, when I say natural, I mean paranormal, like a natural supernatural phenomena, something that like a ghost or a UFO or a cryptid sighting or something like that, something to be like, oh, that's super weird. Like we feel like this hyper focus on having to explain it now to everyone around us, when in the past, like it might have been internalized a little bit more. Why did that happen to me? Why did I have that experience? What was that thing I saw? And we would go through that process for a longer period of time than we would do now, right? So like now, if you think you saw a UFO or a ghost, like you'd snap a picture on your phone and immediately tweet it out. Like, and then you have 60 million people telling you it's fake or trying to explain your experience to you. And you have yet to process your personal experience with that thing. And I think that, maybe that's what's happening too, is that we've lost that certain amount of ability to internalize things, which is what the pandemic and quarantine is making us do, right? And so again, we're in this multi-sided system where it's like I need to hyper focus because of social media and because of the way the society and culture is right now. I can't internalize, but also I'm being forced into my house, so I have to internalize. And so we have all of these conflicting ideas that are going on. Maybe that's the increase in strangeness that we've seen, is the amount of conflicting information and data and internalization of our thoughts that we haven't had it ever.
And it makes me wonder about the ideas of certain, the idea that certain poltergeists can be manifested from our own subconscious and then be happening in the house around us, as opposed from an external source, a quote unquote external source. If this friction between the external and the internal that you're talking about, if we can call it that, isn't creating more more of that is kind of manifesting itself outside of ourselves. And then I guess you could apply that across the board when it comes to other, conflict, transition, etc. Because there's always a friction. There's always a rubbing against of two different things in opposite directions or trying to push one way or the other. Could maybe cause that, because then there's that tension, that friction happening inside of our minds that maybe we kind of don't even that we try not to pay attention to on many levels, or we'd just be stuck thinking about it all day.
Yeah. And I think too, there's so many different varying processes all happening at once. Like when you have a moment that perhaps stops that noise in your head, right? Like that all of a sudden triggers a whole series of events as well too. Like, what is happening to me right now? Why am I not holding my phone on my phone, binge watching something, cooking something in the kitchen, waiting for the mail, waiting for my package to be delivered? Why did I just have a moment of calm and silence? Why did this become very real right now? And again, I think that's a state that we've forgotten about. I think that, I find it really interesting too. We talked very quickly on DM about like words, right? And how words are important. And like, I don't know who named TikTok, the app TikTok, but like, I assume that TikTok isn't meant to be a clock ticking and talking, right? Like, I assume, maybe incorrectly, that it's the character TikTok from Baum's Wizard of Oz. And TikTok is a robot slave that you have to wind up. It can't feel, it's not happy, it's not sad, and will wind down if you don't constantly wind it up. And you can wind up separately, like its brain or its heart or its legs, and it will work for anyone and no one. It doesn't have any feelings. And I've always thought it's interesting how fast TikTok took off and what the character of TikTok was like. And then I try and apply that into like this weird idea of how our minds work. And is there something there too, where I've talked about before, when I talk about the imaginings and the dreamings, I think that artists, and comedians included, I think comedians are artists. I'm trying to give you a little shout there.
Well, we appreciate that over here. You're really buttering our biscuit over here.
Are the best precognition, like they are the best versions of Nostradamus, right? Like people who are just taking a moment to imagine, think, take a moment to dream, to create. Like those are, you hit 1,000 times more honestly than Nostradamus or Edgar Cayce or someone like that, right? You're just imagining. And so that weirder world opens up. And do you glimpse the larger world of cryptids, UFOs, Bigfoot? I always find it fascinating that so many comedians are diehard skeptics, that they do not believe in anything whatsoever. And I think that's because they're so hyper-focused on the day-to-day minutia of reality that they miss the larger picture. But yet, if you read science fiction, which almost never has comedy in it whatsoever, science fiction writers are imagining all of these intensely weird worlds, and then science follows and discovers sometimes the imaginings of science fiction writers. Now, science fiction writers also notoriously skeptic, don't believe in the things that they're writing about. Science tries to prove some of the things that science fiction writers are talking about. And then you have a whole group of people who are saying like, but there's all this weird stuff that, the artists and the creators don't believe in, but I think it's there. Could someone do something with that? And then you're relegated as being kind of crazy when comedians, science fiction writers, scientists, all these non-believers are doing absolutely wild and crazy things. They're breaking down reality. They're constructing new realities. They're telling you how reality works. And then you have a whole group of people who are looked at as crazy, who are saying like, well, how does it work? And don't worry about it. Like this is the take on it. I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over. It's just sparking so many different thoughts.
It's really fascinating because this group of people you're talking about,
and there's
like,
no.
Well, these,
I'm sorry, I just have to interject.
Okay, yeah, go.
And the other thing is too is like, the reason I do get annoyed with comedians is because like comedians are our tricksters, right? There are archetypes for like the comedian, the Joker. And so like when someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right, like has no sense of humor, like he's explaining like why people's Halloween decorations aren't scientifically possible, or like writing books on like how Star Trek can't be real. It's like, we know that, like we understand that. Why are you ruining this fun thing for us? Because genuinely, to go back to where we began, they don't know. And there's an internalized fear of like, if I don't know and act like I don't know, people are going to think I'm a fraud. You know, I can't tell you how many scientists I know who tell you like, will have talked to me and they say like, there's no such thing as ghosts and there's no such thing as UFOs. There's no such thing as Bigfoot. There's no such thing as poltergeist. All of it is hooey. It's all just chemicals in your brain that make you feel a certain way. You know, love is just an endorphin drop, and you know the chemical information systems of dopamine release, and it's like, is that so? That's what you tell your child. Like when you don't tell your child you love them, right? Like most scientists I know actually have families and children. And so like when your little kid looks at you and is like, I love you, daddy, you don't look at your 4-year-old and go like, well, you don't actually, you don't love me, right? You're having a dopamine drop in your brain and you're having some chemical releases in the like medulla oblongata that are causing you to think that you love me. But the reality of the situation is that you're just a chemical robot and your body is going through the evolved motions of that. And someday you'll die and none of this is worth anything. So like, that's what you tell your child.
That's just funny. It's like you just I just imagine this scientist's house at night tucking their child into bed. My dopamine drops when I see you because part of my DNA is in you. Good night.
Yeah.
And then that's how they say I love you in the house. You know, so many of my friends think I'm such a whack job, you know, in the world of comedians. And because there is that cynicism and that skepticism, because, you know, trying to break down and analyze every little thing, like you said, the minutia of life, and sometimes the bigger ideas too. And like, well, where can I find a flaw in this to expose it and find some comedy about how ridiculous it is that people believe in this thing? Because I'll show people how funny it is that this is a real thing, right? And it makes me wonder too about, like when it comes to like the bigger picture, you have this small group of people like who are interested in the paranormal and want answers and are trying to find answers. And they're not the people creating these narratives, right? Or, you know, they're the ones who are just, oh, I had this experience and it drove me into looking more into it. I saw this thing and I wanted to understand it better. And they're the crazy ones, as you said, like, as opposed to like what you were saying about the people who are creating these other worlds or breaking down certain things and saying this is how it is, even if it's for comedy or, you know, science fiction purposes. The people who are just observing and trying to figure out why something happened that they saw are the ones that are like, you're living in a whole different world.
Yeah.
You need to like really somehow get grounded.
Yeah. And the thing that I think it's funny too, back to comedians just for a second, like I've seen a lot of improv in my life. And again, a lot of comedians and improv artists, like they are very diehard skeptic about anything that's weird. But if you go to an improv show, I guarantee you that within 10 minutes, someone is a time traveler or a ghost or a monster. Like that is a go-to, like immediately, like I don't believe in this thing, but I'm going to use it to its fullest extent.
Yeah, exactly. The tools, these foolish tools are at my disposal,
Right,
for sure. I love the idea of the foolish tools. I wonder, something that I think about a lot is, you know, we talk about change and transition and, you know, the liminal space, and climate change for me is something that I don't think we realize, all of us, when I say we, I'm talking about the world and specifically people in the West. I don't think we realize the profound effect knowing climate change is real and the implications it has on our future. I don't think we realize the profound effect that has on our state of mind. And, you know, part of me, I'm not smart enough to extrapolate, you know, all the different things, but there's this ominous thing. And I think Don't Look Up was such a good movie. I don't know if people have seen it yet, but I highly recommend watching it. Adam McKay does such a great job with making his films, in my opinion. But we have such a profound we are so profoundly affected by understanding that climate change is real, and it's very doomsday-ish, and yet it's not science fiction. Although some people would like us to believe it is. It is very real, and it affects every person on this planet. And we bury it. So many of us bury it and just ignore it. And I think so when it comes to like the trickster manifesting itself, potentially in these times of great change, and then maybe manifesting itself in a more intense way, if the change is more intense, maybe we are undergoing quite possibly the biggest change. And this is another, it's the worst it's ever been kind of mentality. But has it ever been more profound when it comes to climate change? And, it's in the word climate change, it's in those words. Like, does that make prime fertile ground for all of this crazy stuff to be happening and really taking root? And all this, coupled with the fact that we have so many more squirrels on this planet that we are making uninhabitable for the squirrels, right? But we don't want to address that we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and perhaps the growing cyclical nature of these types of things, especially with the climate, because I can imagine, but I obviously don't have a personal experience of thinking about the Industrial Revolution and like just chunks of creosote like falling out of the sky because, there was so much oil and coal being burned. And that's right around the time of people starting to see airships in like 1896 and the rise of spiritualism and people talking to their dead loved ones. And, then we get to this point now where we see the oceans are full of garbage and the weather patterns are obviously don't seem to be correct, like at all. It's snowing right now in Detroit, but that's like the first real solid snow we've had. And it's, the end of January. And that seems very strange to me. And I feel like part of when you were saying like we kind of push down like our ideas or maybe even feelings about climate change, because there's something in us that understands that like individually, there are so many of us that are doing whatever we can to negate climate change. And then we watch, Twitter or TikTok or CNN or whatever news you're watching. And we see like one person burn 1 billion gallons of fuel so that they can go into space for like 4.5 minutes. And I don't remember what I read, but it was something like, the Bezos going to space. I think that rocket burned as much fuel in like its 15-minute flight as like 11 million people for a year. And so like, what am I doing by like using green garbage bags? You know what I mean? That like, I'm trying, I'm doing my best. I talked to a friend of mine who's an ecologist or an eco-scientist. And I was saying, what can I do? I need to do more. And he laughed and said, listen, Tenney, you're a 50-year-old man. You're not married. And you don't have any kids. Like your carbon footprint is nothing. You've never created another person who's going to generate like waste. You can basically throw shit on the ground for the rest of your life. You're not going to match up to a family of 4. Like that's just not going to happen. Even the family of 4 recycling as best they can, it's still going to have a larger carbon footprint than you as a single 50-year-old man with no children. So go ahead and like let furl the dogs of war, right? Like go ahead, do whatever you want. But there is this thing where it's like, it is our house and we do live here together. And there are a lot of us that want it to be different, but there is this other force that's unwilling to say, I don't know. How can you help me with this? There are obviously people out there saying, this is how I can help you with this, but they're not being listened to, or this is how we can work with each other. But again, you've got a huge group of people right now who for the first time are self-reflecting. And I think that this does stem out of the 80s and 90s, the kind of me period, right? Where everybody needs to take care of me. And there's so many people that have forgotten that like, there's no you without me. Like I have to take care of the people around me. You are my family. This is our house. We live here together. And, I can't have a guy who sets fires in my kitchen every single day. Like, we've got to work on this together. But there are so many people who, because they're self-reflecting for the first time, they're like, oh, I'm important. And yes, you are important. And your thoughts and ideas are important. And they might be contrary to mine, but you're still here with me. So we have to figure this out, or the house burns to the ground and then we're homeless. And at the same time, too, with all the squirrels running back and forth and not really stopping to talk to each other, but just nodding and acknowledging as they fly by, like, is that grand design of the cosmic trickster joke? Do we get to a point where the punchline is like, oh, it wasn't humans. We're not supposed to be here. Isn't that funny? We spent all this time and did all this stuff, and it wasn't us anyway.
I mean, that would be, and I don't think I'm, I don't think I'm, breaking the bank when I say that, it very could be some kind of solar sun cycle kind of thing at the end of the day. Like, 200 years from now, we'll realize, oh, they all thought they were, but it's like when you hear stories like, well, I'm a religious person and it's very arrogant to think that humans could have an effect on God's earth this way. Like, God, like, we can't affect God's kingdom, and it's like, well, no, you tell that to the people who don't have clean drinking water,
Right.
And it's like when you say that Bezos fact, it's almost like a bunch of people sharing a house, and maybe there's, we have to be careful because we have a well and there's only so much water, and everybody's being very meticulous about how they're filling up their water bottles, and then meanwhile Bezos is going around the house turning on every faucet. I just like the way it sounds. It
Right.
relaxes me to have running water around all the time, and it's just like, no, bro, we can't be doing this. Now, to go like large scope, let's zoom out a little bit here, as if the scope wasn't large enough already. Do you think it's possible that, and I don't want to get into like the forces of good versus the forces of evil necessarily, but maybe we will kind of touch on that a little bit. Do you think it's possible that having knowledge of the trickster and understanding, the many different ways the trickster can manifest itself, do you think this is something that can be harnessed, and in fact has been harnessed by the people who maybe they have esoteric knowledge that dates back very far? And I'm not saying some of this knowledge was suppressed, but maybe it's, very cryptic, and there is this ultimate knowledge that's been passed down from wherever and however, whether it's euphonauts or whoever else, right? Do you think this trickster energy is purposefully harnessed and used to affect outcome in any way by groups of people or by individuals?
I think that,
if it even can be, by the way, I should,
I think that I don't know if the archetype or energy of the trickster can be harnessed, but it can be emulated. And I think that's what we see a lot of the time, whether it's in advertising or on television shows. Like, we can emulate it, but I don't know if you can actually shape it and change it. And it's funny because when I think about occultists, I feel like occultists are that blend of the reason that it does seem to be a smaller faction of the weird world is occultists seem to be the blend of the paranormal believer, the scientist, the science fiction writer, and the comedian, right? Like, occultists have taken all this. They're like, I'm going to dress up in a robe. I'm going to do all of these things using all of these symbols in this way, doing their ritual for this very silly purpose to have this desired result and outcome of this thing that I don't understand. So, like, in my brain, occultists are always this fusion of all of the different personalities that exist within, like our community, and even the dark sides of it too, right? Like occultism becomes this thing that anyone can do, but I think that it's just an emulation of the larger nature of the trickster spirit. I've often talked about, like, I think that it intrudes into our real world more than we give it credit for. Just the occult ideas that are kind of embodied in tricksterism and joking, like it finds its way in. One of the things that I talk about at my lectures is, like, if you've never been to a large scale occult ritual, and I might have said this to you on the podcast before when we talked, but if you've ever been to a large scale occult ritual, you have an elder who has a grimoire who tells the initiated what to do on a hollowed piece of ground that's covered in chalk and symbols, and then they're surrounded by the uninitiated who chant and sing in unison to affect desired result on the hallowed piece of ground, right? And like, that's football. Like, you have a coach with a playbook, and he has players that he tells what to do on a piece of ground covered with chalk and symbols, surrounded by fans who chant and sing in unison to affect a desired result on the ground. Like, that archetype has worked its way into sport, which is play, which is, the larger idea of the jokester and the trickster. Like, just play. Like, here's something to do.
That's beautiful. And God, it's intriguing and beautiful. And I as soon as you said we can emulate it, the first image that popped in my mind was the State Farm commercials where Mayhem. It's that one actor who's Mayhem, and in trying to show you that Mayhem exists. I'm Mayhem. You need State Farm to cover Mayhem. As far as, like, a ridiculous idea of emulating. I can't be inside the brains of the people who came up with that advertising campaign, but I can suspect that they are aware of the the archetype of the trickster 100% for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the idea of, magical symbols are logos. The whole point of creating a magical symbol is to have this abstraction of an idea that isn't the idea, but you can look at it and call up the nature of the idea, whether, it's a sigil or an occult symbol, whatever. But I mean, it's a logo, it's a brand, it's the Adidas mountains or the Nike swoosh, right? Like, it's just a symbol that represents this larger narrative. And that emulation of this occult principle of, you need to take a hieroglyph and that's going to mean something, and then you get into magic words and languages, and again, we said, words were important in our DM. Like, that's the thing too. You have advertising agents who sit around for weeks, if not months, figuring out which words to use to affect results in their sales campaign. And
SEO is its own form of magical language, right? And how good are you at SEO? Like, how effective are these words in affecting outcome? So it's kind of, it's melted into to all different areas of life, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it's and the thing is too, is I really do feel like there is this inborn in human beings, all human beings, cross-culturally around the world, when we say archetypes, there is a reason why certain pieces of music are beautiful, and pretty much everyone can agree on it. Whether it's a swell of a classical piece, or it's a human being who is in a part of a song, says a word, and when they sang it, it was full of emotion, and there's magical power behind that. And we realize, words are magic. You can look at someone, and when you feel love in your heart and it's radiating through your body, and you look into the eyes of the person across from you for who you feel love, and you say the words, when you say, I love you, they feel the word, right? And you can direct the same thing with I hate you. Like, when someone is viscerally like screaming, I hate you, you can feel the anger. Like, the words do carry energy and power with them. And I know people will say, of course, it's just the dopamine drops in your head, right? Like, but there is an affectation that you can take with words when you watch occult rituals, even when you watch television commercials where someone is sitting off screen and they're saying you have to hit that word a little harder. And they're meaning, I don't feel the word. And, you know, whether it's me working on a paranormal television show, they'll say, can you say that again? It felt off to me. Like, we know that words are powerful and that they can be used, but I feel like, again, inherently cross-culturally around the world, there are these sounds, tones, and feelings that we recognize as powerful and magical, and we emulate them, but I don't think that we actually change them or use them.
Okay, so it's not like the you know, in my mind, the imagery is like someone being able to put a leash on the trickster and be like, now I've got you. Now you will do my bidding, right? That's not necessarily something that we're thinking is really even possible.
Well, and that's, you know, again, when I was saying, you know, philosophies around the world always say bend and change, right? And the other thing too is that mythologies around the world always have a story about catching the trickster and catching the jokester, and that never goes well because they cannot be caught, right? Like whether it's we have to catch Loki, he's doing a lot of bad things, and they catch Loki and they're like, oh fuck, what did we do there? Why did we try and do this? This has all gone horribly wrong. Like, it's the same thing, right? Like, you can try, but it's not going to work out.
Yeah, that's I think those are wise words. You know, whether it's a Roadrunner or Loki or anyone else, it's like you don't need to get your hands on them.
Right.
It's fascinating. This has been a fascinating chat. I can't remember exactly what time, you know, we kicked things off, but I think we're right about there.
Well, thank you for letting me babble. I'm sorry if I babbled too much.
Oh, no, never. I want to make sure, just a final thought on all this.
Sure.
When it comes to the changes happening in the world and our country specifically, do you think it's a coincidence that during this major period of upheaval, you have what I would consider to be the meekest form of disclosure from the United States government? But at the same time, even though I thought it was paltry and quite pathetic, actually, the Pentagon's report on UFOs, what I can't forget happened is that they actually released a report, right? Right. There was finally a crack in the dam of information, which I don't want to be too dismissive of that, even my personal feelings about the report itself. Do you think that it's a coincidence that during the pandemic, during all this political upheaval, during the narrative that's being pushed down everyone's throat about how divided we are, which, you know, if we were as nearly divided as everyone keeps trying to tell us we were, this country would have burned down a couple of years ago, I think. Do you think it's a coincidence that's when this piece of information comes out? Or do you think it's or purposeful?
I don't think it's coincidental. I think that my take on, I started in doing lectures in the 90s on conspiracy theory and UFOs, and then branched out into everything else weird, you know, in the early mid 90s. But as someone who has watched all of this kind of evolve and grow, the one thing that I can't shake from my brain, and maybe I wish I could, is that we live in a period of time now, and it's also a part of recognition of my age, that the people who are in charge of the government are people my age. And people my age grew up watching Star Wars and Star Trek and reading UFO magazines and reading comic books. And they have always wanted to know about UFOs. And now they are in charge of things, and they have a greater interest in those things because they are of my generation, where those things were of interest to us. And so I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't also think it's purposeful. I think it's a natural outgrowth of, now you have people in positions of power who say like, oh, you know, when I was growing up, I used to watch Star Trek and I used to watch In Search of. Now I'm a congressman. Did we ever do anything with UFOs? Maybe we should do something with UFOs. Let's do something with UFOs. And they are. And I think that that's great, but I don't think that it's a swelling bubble that's about to burst. I think it's just there are people in positions of power now who are willing to openly say, listen, I've always been fascinated in this shit. It's weird. And I appreciate that. But that also gives rise to that trickster nature of stuff for us to say like, look, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Are they going to tell you? You should start thinking about it because you don't know the answer and neither do they. And then belief system get formed around that. And yes, of course, there's going to be disclosure, and then it all kind of falls apart because it doesn't become fun anymore. Like once people, you know, and I said this about government disclosure, and I've also said it about, you know, people have said there should be college classes on ghost hunting and paranormal phenomena and psychical research. And it goes right back to the beginning of our talk. It's like once there are rules, it's no fun to play anymore.
That's a beautiful way to put a button on all that. I couldn't agree more. And that's part of my problem with comedy, stand-up comedy classes. And I never realized it until you vocalized it just now.
The rules?
The rules, because to me there are no rules in stand-up comedy. It can be whatever you want, and I feel like it's the same way with psychical research, paranormal investigations, ufology, and our desire to be accepted by this mainstream materialism is I mean, I'd love to get into that another time with you, because I'm going down this deep rabbit hole on Greenfield and, you know, the idea of the Great White Brotherhood versus the Black Lodge, and, you know, materialism versus intuition, and all of these other things from some of these other writers that I've been consuming about, like death and, you know, the future of now and all this other stuff. And I think it would be fun to chat with you about that. But let's remind people that they can find you on Twitter at John E.L. Tenney. I believe the Instagram account's the same handle. Yep. And and do you want to talk about the podcast real quick?
Yeah. A friend of mine, Jessica, and I started a podcast about a year ago, kind of the height of the pandemic. And it's, you know, not recorded on microphones and anything like that. It's just a phone call that I have with her once a week, and we record it and release it as a phone call. And I think I did that because one of my favorite things when I would go out into public was just listening to other people's conversations and hearing people talk to each other about nonsense. And I felt like, oh, maybe you don't need to have a topic. Maybe you don't need to have a... So it became a non-topic podcast, but it's called What's Up Weirdo, and it's just her and I talking to each other about things. And we've discussed everything from why you shouldn't use hotel coffee makers to we started the podcast 2 weeks after my mother died. So we talk about my mom dying, and her dog died a couple months after that. We talked about that. I mean, I still tell people all the time, you know, it's two friends talking, so you never know what you're going to get. Like, even that's one of the reasons I like having conversations with you. Like, I don't know where it's going to lead. By the way, it's been over a year, but it is still very strange. I'm talking to you from the room where my mother died.
Oh, wow. When it comes to, I mean, gosh, I feel like we could launch onto a whole nother thing, because I mean, you're someone who feels very deeply. I mean, I think people who are very curious about the universe and the world around us and who dive deeply into the mysteries of life are extremely sensitive. And when it comes to the idea of grief as opposed to death, do you find that your research, your practices, just your lifestyle and your experience with, you know, occultism and things like, do you think that that aided you in the grief process, or or I know so many of us are grief avoidant, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot right now about whether or not you experienced grief on your mother's death, but obviously
No,
you did. But
I think it was a confluence of my imaginings and thinkings and thoughts and my upbringing. And obviously I experienced grief, but I think I process it differently in the sense that I realized very early in my life that my parents would never want, they did everything in their lives. My dad is still alive, but my mom did everything throughout her life to make sure that I wasn't sad. Like, it would break my mother's heart to know that she had done something that makes me sad. And so if I am to be sad because she died, that is because of her that I am sad. And what a disservice to her that the final thing she did in life was make me sad, when she spent her whole life making sure I wouldn't be sad.
my whole life led to this inevitable death, which would create a thing I've spent my whole life not doing. I mean, talk about a trickster cycle.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your loss, and it's always such a great time to see you and to
well,
hear
I think
your
too,
thoughts on
I'll
things.
say this to anybody experiencing grief and loss, because I know a lot of people are right now. And I've said this at my lectures too, the few that I've done throughout the pandemic, which is the things that we do love most about people: their love, their kindness, their joy, their happiness, their caring. All of those things that I just mentioned, which endear us to people, those things were never tangible to us in the first place, that we couldn't touch someone's love with our hands or their joy with our hands. Those things were infinite and intangible always. And whether or not their body is here, those things remain infinite and untangible, and they are as real as they were when the body was here.
That's beautiful. And what other proof do you need of
Right.
the existence of all things wonderful, strange? Man, John, it's been a real treat.
Ryan, always my pleasure.
I look forward, hopefully you'll be around when I visit Detroit later in the year.
Yeah, I will.
October, and we'll have to go to that diner where you're the king.
I don't even know if that's open anymore.
Oh man, that would be, three of my favorite diners here in town closed really early on permanently, which was sad. It's like, where do you go at 2 a.m. to talk about weird stuff?
Right.
On a Tuesday night, right? So I'm a diner guy, always will be. But thanks again for doing this. And I want to mention, you can check out johnnyeltini.bandcamp. You can go listen to. I was listening to your music to get in the mode for today.
Oh, yeah, some of that weird electronic music.
Oh yeah, some. I was listening to Sirius.
Oh yeah.
Check out John's music. He's an amazing musician. You'll be glad that you stumbled upon it if you haven't already, which you probably have if you know John at all. So again, thanks again, and we'll have to do this again sometime in the near future. I look forward to it. And check out What's Up Weirdo and all of the other stuff. Do you have any appearances coming up that you wanted to plug real quick, or?
Not really. I'm going to Europe in July.
Oh, okay.
But that's a ways off, and who knows if that'll actually happen, depending on what variant we get to.
Yeah, who knows? Just as long as we don't get to Voltron, I think we'll be fine.
I'll form the head.
Thanks for listening to another experience of me and Paranormal You. That was the great John Tenney. Don't forget that Crystallize app is now available for download in the Android, the Google Play, and the Apple app stores. So please download the app. It's free. You get 33 free snaps per month. You get 33 total free collection items in your crystal collection. But if you want to upgrade to the premium, you can do that for $3.99 a month or $19.99 for the year. That gives you unlimited snaps, unlimited collection. We are diligently working on 200 more crystals to be added to the identification database. We're excited about that. We've got approximately 100 crystals that can identify now. We've got daily content. We've got info and ethical sourcing. We got all kinds of stuff. I mean, check out your database. You know what I mean? You don't remember what your crystal is or what it does, use the app. You know what I mean? We got a great database curated by the psychic teachers that we're very excited about providing you free of charge. No ads, no free trial. Just get in there and do it. If you're a Kickstarter backer, if you participated in the Crystal Bounty, or if you are on our waiting list, you'll be getting your free access activated either today or tomorrow. It's happening this week, okay? So we're rolling that out this week. So it will be activated for you this week. So we're very excited about that. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your support. Love you. Also got the Patreon page. It's popping off over there. I'm posting all kinds of new content over there. I've got 2 new tiers, the $11 tier and the $20 tier. The $20 is the Paranormal Podcast, it's stand-up comedy, it's all kinds of stuff going on over there. That's like a breaking free from being specifically paranormal over there. That's got all kinds of good stuff going to be happening over there. So, and all of the podcasts will be available on YouTube moving forward. We're not going to do video exclusive here. I'm going to be posting all of the podcast episodes on YouTube from here on out. So thanks again. Thank you for your support. Give a follow on Instagram, Rising, Twitter, Rising, Crystallize app, TikTok, Ryan Singer Comedy. Check all that out. I'm out there making content for everybody. So hope you're having a good time. Hope you're enjoying yourself. I've got tour dates on ryansingercomedy.com coming in, plus other really fun shows in the works. And I'll keep you updated about my stand-up comedy special, The Supernatural, will be coming out sometime this year as well, along with a documentary about Post Town, which looks like it's going to be a series because it's getting good. I'll see you soon, and if I don't, I'll see you at the watering hole on the astral plane.